10 takeaways. What a week. What a week. And we start with Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor, hey, he's back. Hey! Woo! Jonathan Taylor. It's so cool to have him back. I love Jonathan Taylor. I have a Jonathan Taylor signed jersey. Let's all remember this. Check this out. Look at this. Look at this signed jersey. Look at the signed jersey. Jonathan Taylor. He's awesome. He's been dealing with this recurring ankle injury. This high ankle sprain has been just chronic, and it takes time. We talked about this at length. A guy returns from a high ankle sprain. He's yet another month away from even feeling like himself. And with Jonathan Taylor, it's taken like a month and a half. Comes back 6 weeks later, finally. He's feeling 100%, and he's looking 100%, and he's producing at 100%. Huge fantasy points. Week winning. I mean, if you made it through, if you somehow made it into the playoffs, and there's going to be some Jonathan Taylor teams that are going to be cashing in best ball, if you make it through into the shootout with Jonathan Taylor, you're going to be printing money. Jonathan Taylor, we had Jaden Daniels, we had Jahmyr Gibbs, Justin Jefferson. Those were the big scorers this week. Very exciting. So that's. I mean, it was a great matchup for Jonathan Taylor. Like I said, we saw 3 touchdowns. We saw 200 rushing yards. But this was clearly going to be a good week for Jonathan Taylor. That was pretty clear. And he's benefiting from the Alfred Morris corollary. He's benefiting from Anthony Richardson also being a rushing threat. And we're finally seeing Jonathan Taylor at peak performance, and it's just very cool. Very cool to see. I love him. I will always and forever be in his debt for being better than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It is the greatest take I ever had. I can't even believe that I needed to have the take in the first place, that the Chiefs were stupid enough to draft a system running back that just happened to be on a championship team getting dump offs from Joe Burrow with a small, slow satellite back that is actually not super electric in space or not particularly adept at catching passes, just happened to be there for the dump offs at LSU, that guy would get drafted in the first round over Jonathan Taylor will forever be one of the great mistakes in the history of the NFL draft, and I capitalized on it, and Nate Liss is no longer with the Sonic Truth podcast, and I think that series of debates certainly did not help. It did not help retain Nate Liss, that he felt like he had that Clyde Edwards-Helaire cape up hanging over him. I just think that was became a mental hurdle for him. That's the speculation. We're all speculating. We're gonna talk to Alex Dunlap more in the offseason. I love these Content King shows. We end up just talking football because there's so much to talk about just week in, week out with what's happening in the NFL, that we don't get to dig really into the business as much. And we're going to dig more into podcasting, the Player Profiler Podcast Network. How do we build this network? How did it all come together? I'm going to talk more with Alex about some of the mechanics behind that. How do we get Nate Liss back? It would be my one wish, would be to get him back. But would I go back in time? If the devil were to approach me with a deal and say, well, I get that you desperately want Nate Liss back. Alan Seslowsky is suddenly this super unreliable co-host. And we love Jax Falcone for sure, but he already has his own show, The Undrafted, which is doing great on the network. So you want Nate Liss back. Podcasting has never been as good as Nate Liss and I arguing about Jonathan Taylor versus Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If the Devil said he'll come back, but we have to go back in time and erase the Jonathan Taylor debate, make it so you never happened, like you just talked about Jonathan Taylor briefly, you talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire briefly, but we're going to erase that from the history of the show. Would you take that deal? Okay, so I have to undo this, this. So if I had to undo this, okay, I have to undo this. All right? And no one will ever know how bullish I was on Taylor and how much I discounted Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'll never have that take on my resume. We'll never have those shows. But we get to have Nate back. Would I take that deal? No. No way. I don't want him back that bad. I want him back bad, though. It's my number one wish. So if anyone out there knows Nate Liss, let him know. Let him know. Tell him we miss him badly. We want him back. And ask him if he enjoyed this Jonathan Taylor performance. Why do I do this? Why? Why do this? Why? The victory lapping. I want a victory lap on Jerome Ford a little bit. We have Jerome Ford in the Kings Classic. We've talked about the story of how we ended up with Jerome Ford and how we were bidding on Jerome Ford and Chuba Hubbard. They were the last running backs that were starting in week one that we could possibly get for our roster. It felt like the whole team was hanging in the balance. Could we somehow sneak through a low bid on Chuba or Jerome Ford? We ended up with Jerome Ford, and he delivered in week 16. And this was an important point. We spent a lot of time on the Starter Stream show on Sundays. The thing we spent the most time on was discussing Patrick Taylor versus Kendre Miller versus Jerome Ford. And Jerome Ford rushed for 800 yards last year. In fact, I still have his player page pulled up here. Okay? We still have the Jerome Ford player page pulled up. Let's pull it back up. Let's pull it back up right now. And you can see 800 yards plus, and then 44 receptions last year. So we already know that Jerome Ford is a good football player. He runs a 4.45, so he's athletic, he has size, he has hands. We can't say anything like that about Kendre Miller. We can't say anything close to that about Patrick Taylor. So what are we talking about here? It's clearly Jerome Ford is going to be the primary back in Cleveland, and we know he's good, so he's in a different tier of player for week 16 than the Kendre Millers and the Patrick Taylors and the other running backs that are free squares. Okay. Jerome Ford's a free square in DFS, but he's also a known quantity. He's a good player that's just found himself back in a primary back role, and you play the hell out of him, and you print money. And that's what happened this past week. So I hope you play Jerome Ford over those other options. If you're in your RB2 spot, even in your flex spot. That's the other thing we talked about was, hey, Jerome Ford or Jalen Coker, right? You always want to play the primary back, the starting running back. They have upside. They have great touchdown equity. They have the ability to go out and catch 3 or 4 passes. And Jerome Ford was 5 for 5 in the receiving game. So I think he outproduced Jalen Coker just in the receiving game, without even talking about the fact that he rushed for 92 yards and a touchdown. So I like to play big play wide receivers, particularly wide receiver twos and good offenses, in flex. The Darnell Mooney archetype, right? Unless you have the option of a Jerome Ford, an athletic running back who's walking into a primary back role this week. Then in that case, that overrides. So that's the hierarchy is the Jerome Ford archetype, then the Darnell Mooney archetype, then the next archetype down from there in terms of who you're playing in flex, process-wise. Now, staying with this Cleveland Browns team, I don't know why we're opening with so many Cleveland Browns takeaways. I have about 25 takeaways. I'm also driving to my sister's house in Maine today, so this has to be a rapid-fire show. We got to get the live show done. We've got to get that in the can. We've got to produce the podcast, drop the podcast as soon as possible, and get the hell out of town. So this is going to be just rapid fire the entire way. It's rapid fire, but I couldn't get it down to 10 takeaways. Now, we've talked about this many times. Theo wants this to be a tight show. This is going to be a tight show. This is going to be a very fast, rapid fire show. But I have like 25 takeaways, and I can't decide. These all mean a lot to me. You want me to talk about Brian Thomas, don't you? I want to talk about Chikakonkwo. I want to talk about the Rams defense. I want to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. I want to talk about Josh Downs. Talk about Drake May, James Cook. You want to talk about all these guys, right? So we're talking about them. I have like 25 takeaways, and we're going to appease Theo by just going very quickly. And I have like 24 more takeaways coming up after this. Hey, I know it's a popular statistic to cite, these underdog pick'ems, the vast majority of people go more than on any given player. Yeah, close to 80% of people, but that's because it's easier to find the shootouts than it is to find the dud games every Sunday afternoon. Like we knew week 5, Ravens-Bengals was going to be a shootout. And there goes Lamar Jackson for 4 touchdowns. There goes Joe Burrow for 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry gets there. Zay Flowers is over 100 yards. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both got there, as well as Chase Brown. Both Chases got there. You go more than, you win 100x your payout on Underdog with their Pick 6 contest. But then you look at Dolphins-Patriots, that's going down the toilet, right? Too bad Ramondre Stevenson had 18 fantasy points. But you improve your chances at positive returns when you correlate with these Underdog pick'ems. Use promo code Underworld. This is the biggest bonus Underdog has ever given out, up to $125. Promo code is Underworld. Put in $250, you get $125. Now go start picking. I've got takeaways for you. Many, many, many takeaways here. And it's rapid fire. And in the chat, Applied Literature, great to see you, buddy. He was thinking about Jerome Ford, had his finger on the button to go Jerome Ford. He was hovering over the button, and he went with Kenneth Walker. I understand why he went Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker was a great process play. Kenneth Walker is who we know he is, which is he is an alpha. And if he's playing, if he's active, like most running backs, when they're active, they're not going to be playing with limitations. There's no such thing as a decoy running back. Okay? Sometimes a wide receiver will be active, especially the first couple weeks back for Brian Thomas. If you remember, he was not 100%. He was a decoy. Okay? He was playing with limitations. Deebo Samuel playing with limitations. And now Deebo Samuel is starting to look like Deebo Samuel again. Just like Jonathan Taylor, looking like Jonathan Taylor again. Like these guys in their late 20s, it takes them many weeks to get back into playing shape. And even the previous week in the rain, we saw Deebo Samuel. He looked explosive. He was playing a lot of snaps. Just happened to just drop the football on the ground that would have been a surefire touchdown. Just breaks one tackle, which is what Deebo does. And then what does Deebo do? Then he finds a way this week, the week that everyone finally benched him, right? We said, hey, you got to start him against the Rams, and then the rain comes in, and then he drops the the surefire touchdown. And then I could see people just being like, okay, all right, I can't do this. But even during the Starter Stream show, there were a lot of questions about, hey, this player or Debo. And it's like, hey, Debo's still scheduled to play a lot of snaps. He's still explosive. I don't think he's going to drop passes on the numbers on the ground this week. So you just need to look at the projections on Player Profiler and go with that. With Kenneth Walker, we said, hey, he's going to get most of the carries. If he's starting, he is going to look into the soul of Zach Charbonnet and say, this is my job. I know you've been really productive. You've been great for fantasy football, Zach Charbonnet, but this is my role, and you just have to eat it. And it's a good process play. If you played Kenneth Walker, he went out, he was 8 for 8 as a receiver. Just didn't get the touchdown. He could have easily had the same total fantasy points as Jerome Ford. Could have been almost got, I mean, he was well in the teens just based on the receptions. He had similar yardage numbers as a runner to Tyrone Tracy, just Tyrone Tracy got the touchdown. If you played Kenneth Walker over Tyrone Tracy, that was good process. It's just Tyrone Tracy got the random touchdown and Kenneth Walker didn't. You really couldn't have gone wrong playing Jerome Ford, though. That's the thing. Like, I mean, there wasn't a sound argument really to go Ford over Walker, knowing that this was shaping up to be a shootout, a lot more implied points for Seattle than there were for Cleveland. And if we're working under the assumption that Walker's going to get at least a 60% opportunity share or more, you got to play Walker. And so I don't beat yourself up about that at all. Please don't. This is supposed to be rapid fire, but I'm in the chat and I want to answer these questions. Damn it! I can't. This show. Theo is listening right now. He's going nuts. Like Theo is yelling at the speakers. Move on. Rapid fire. 10 takeaways. Let's go. I know it. Another good process play was to go Brenton Strange over David Njoku. David Njoku was not a strong play. There's no way you could have projected him to get like a 50% target share with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Benching all the receivers for the Browns with Dorian Thompson-Robinson under center was good process. Brenton Strange was the de facto number 2 option with athleticism facing the Raiders. But it's the tight end position. The tight end position is hugely volatile, and that was the heartbreak dud of all tight end performances was Brenton Strange for sure. I like Brenton Strange. I was playing Brenton Strange, and it didn't work out. And that happens. That's going to happen sometimes. It did work out for Bryce Young. Bryce Young's demise has been overstated. And we have to go way back in the time machine. And we're not going to be nullifying my Jonathan Taylor take or my debates with Nate Liss. That's never going to happen. That's forever, Nate. But if we go back, I talked about Bryce Young being a value in Dynasty because it can't get any lower. And we've seen so many instances of players like Jared Goff that imploded on the original team that drafted him with the 101 in some cases. And then 1, 2, 3 teams later, in Sam Darnold's case, they have a career renaissance. And Bryce Young is athletic. Bryce Young can run. And that's what Bryce Young, you look up, oh, wow, how? Bryce Young over 20 fantasy points? Yeah, had a couple touchdowns, and he's running for like 60 yards. It's like, wait a second. Yeah, he's athletic. He was pitched to the NFL as athletic Drew Brees. That's how he was pitched to the league. And in week 16, he looked like athletic Drew Brees throwing darts to Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen was a no-brainer on the waiver wire 6 weeks ago. Pretty easy. Pretty easy case to make, and a pretty difficult case to say, oh, Leggett is going to outproduce Thielen. Jalen Coker, right? Jalen Coker, I love Jalen Coker. I can't explain to people how much I love Jalen Coker, a Holy Cross free agent who's splashing around in the NFL as a rookie. Who doesn't love that? But the idea that he would outproduce Adam Thielen in the second half was silly. That was silly. And a lot of people wanted to play him, wanted to play Jalen Coker last week or on Sunday, and I wasn't into it. It's like, we've already decided that we're playing Adam Thielen. I don't think we're ready to start playing multiple receivers on the Panthers. And yet that we got the result. Coker didn't get there. But it's not because of Bryce Young, and it's not because of that Carolina offense. Carolina scored plenty of points, but it was Chuba Hubbard. So Chuba Hubbard, league winner. I mean, so 0 RB with Chuba Hubbard, the extreme 0 RB, even if you drafted David Montgomery, 0 RB drafters were the ones. The running backs in their range were Aaron Jones, David Montgomery, Brian Robinson. All these players have been productive this year. But then you had Chase Brown, well in your range, and you also had Chuba Hubbard and Jerome Ford. So it's looking like everybody's succeeding. If you were all in on second and third round running backs, late first round running backs like Saquon Barkley, you wanted an early round running back, early first round running back, Bijan Robinson, third round running back, Jonathan Taylor. Or Jonathan Taylor was really a second-round running back in high-stakes FFPC managed leagues. Jonathan Taylor was actually going at the 1-2 turn, but he was leaking into the third round at various points in best ball. So everybody's having a good time. Fourth-round running back, James Cook. Third-round running back, Kyron Williams. You could pretty much find a running back in every round that's hitting this year, which means that everybody's running back drafting strategy is working out. Thank God. Thank God for Chase Brown, Chuba Hubbard, and now Jerome Ford putting 0 RB on their backs. Appreciate that. Shock stat from Sunday. A.J. Brown accounted for 63% of the Eagles' receiving yards. So you're underwhelmed by the target numbers. You might think, the A.J. Brown usage, underwhelming just because they're not throwing enough. Like, all they're doing is running the ball, and that's the thing about number one receivers. Number one receiver is going to get there either way. The Tom Savage corollary. You go back and look at the year that Deshaun Watson missed half the season. It was the perfect experiment. It was a controlled experiment. It was perfect. We had 8 games of Watson, 8 games of Savage. Under Watson, Hopkins' efficiency was tremendous, and he scored like 19 fantasy points a game. Under Savage, his efficiency declined dramatically because the target accuracy dropped, but the total target volume went up because Savage locked in on his number one, and Hopkins scored 19 fantasy points with Tom Savage. So this is what happened to A.J. Brown in a microcosm in one game, where, the Eagles now are in a shootout with Washington because Jalen Hurts is out, and RIP to all your fantasy teams with Jalen Hurts. It hurts, right? It's no good. I'm sorry. It really does. The fact that his name is Hurts is funny, right? So it's kind of a dad joke. So it's been Jalen Hurts dad joke. That's really the name of the show today. Football, right? You're out of the fantasy playoffs because a concussion. That's the NFL right there. And the guy's name is Hurts, and he got concussed. I mean, what are you going to do? It's also the price you pay for all these rushing touchdowns. You love the rushing touchdowns during the year, but the risk of injury goes up. So we live by the sword. We die by the sword. Ooh, really? Did I really do that? Did I just say that? Damn it.
Cliche alert! Cliche alert! Cliche alert! Cliche alert! Cliche alert! Cliche alert!
It's true, though. It's true. There is a risk to the mobile quarterback. There's also a risk of overplaying your hand, thinking you're going to get a shootout because the offenses are better than the defenses. If the defenses are improving, if the defenses have been locking down opposing wide receivers over the last 2-3 weeks, that's important information to account for. And I did not properly account for the improvement of the Rams defense heading into Week 16. I thought there was a higher probability of a shootout. Alex agreed with me on the Content King show. That was part of the problem, was when you have other analysts come on and then they also think the way you're thinking, now suddenly your priors are getting reinforced and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be 24-21 at least. No. It's going to be 35-33. No. What is it? 19-9 Rams Jets. But if you go back and you remember the Monday night game against the Dolphins, there was no weather in that game, and it was just great defense by the Rams on the Dolphins receivers. And then the next week, and you're like, wait a second, this Rams defense, sometimes they get torched for like 30 points, and then, but on average, last couple months, Rams defense coming together. Rams are coming together in general. I don't know. It's the magic trick team of the NFL. I don't know how they do it. Someone has to explain to me how they do it. It really is a magic trick how the Rams do this. They have so few draft picks, yet they draft so well. They sign free agents so well, and they're able to punt all these bad contracts, eat all this salary cap room, and yet still patch together a quality team. And the next thing you know, they're going to be competing in the NFL playoffs. I know this is going to happen. Most teams need to wait 2-3 years and rebuild properly. The Rams never have to do that. They can figure it out. They just figure it out. So Snead and McVay, they are doing something right, able to rebuild a team on the fly again. It's not like the first time they've done this either. It's really impressive what the Rams are doing. Michael Penix didn't have to do anything, right? I was aroused at the thought of Michael Penix at home against the Rams, at home against the Giants, and it didn't matter, right? It's just they ran him over. They didn't need him. They didn't need to whip it out. Who cares? The Giants have the number 1 pick overall. Shadur Sanders going to the New York Giants. I think that's kind of cool. I think that's a cool thing. I'm happy about that. I think Deion's going to be happy with that, right? Deion is going to want his son go to New York. I think that's going to be phenomenal. Very cool. I can't see the Giants winning a game. The Raiders did it. We talked about this. Are the Raiders going to find a way to lose? And they couldn't. They just couldn't find a way to lose. Aiden O'Connell would not let them lose. Aiden O'Connell locked in on Brock Bowers. You love players like Aiden O'Connell who will throw players open, who will feed their alpha receivers, even if there's not necessarily a throw window available. They're willing to throw more interceptions. These are the types of quarterbacks you want throwing to your weapons. So no surprise, Brock Bowers was a must start, not just because of the matchup, but because of who the quarterback was under center. and he goes nuclear again. In fact, I saw Brock Bowers on a winning team on Fast Draft, which was super cool. So Week 16 was our inaugural Quick 6 Super Slam. The Quick 6 Super Slam is a DFS contest where you can just draft anybody. Okay, you can just draft 6 guys, no salaries, any running back, wide receiver, tight end, and then you set your captain's chairs. You set your primary captain, your secondary captain. There's 4 different captain's chairs you set. And as you can see on the screen here, the winning team had Gibbs, Jefferson, Jonathan Taylor, Brock Bowers, Chase Brown, CeeDee Lamb. So the tournament's small enough where you don't have to hit the nuts. You can have a Chase Brown in there and still win. Now, as the tournament gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time, it's going to be harder and harder to have a Chase Brown in there and still finish in first. But for now, you got to check it out. Fastdraft.app. The code is Podfather. We'll double your deposit up to $25. And check out the Super Slam. You could just put in as many teams as you have time for. It takes 2 minutes to build a team. We also have the Flex 6 Frenzy where you can join drafts and you can live draft. So live draft against 9 other competitors for Week 17 or just build Super Slam teams. And this week, Christmas week, we are rolling out the playoff frenzy. So the playoff frenzy is coming. Get ready for that. Pick 6 guys for the NFL playoffs. You can pick any 6. Look at the schedule. Look at the projected brackets. See who you think is going to make it far, who the superstars are that are going to make it deep into the playoffs, and go with those 6 guys. So always more fun contests coming out. We're working so hard behind the scenes. Before this show, I'm working on Fast Draft. After this show, I'm working on Fast Draft. There's so many different things you can do with fantasy games and a fantasy app that with our technical capabilities, sky's the limit. It's just, it's so exciting what's possible and how much innovation is possible. And it's amusing to me that you just look around and you see a lot of the same games being recycled and you have these microwave contests. And it's like, where's the creativity? There's so many different types of games you can roll out that are unique and new that'll get people excited. And that's what we're all about with Fast Draft. So enjoy. I still think that Penix has a big game in him, right? When you're up 20, that's not a fantasy performance that you want to judge the player by, but it did go over 200 yards. It's not like he went for 100 yards. He went over 200 yards. Didn't have to. I think it was pretty impressive. Just didn't score a lot of fantasy points, unfortunately. But that's why you go to our projections. I liked Michael Penix because it's funny to talk about Penix and being aroused and erected and all these things. But you do have to go to Player Profiler's weekly rankings to see where exactly he's projected. Was he a top 12 option? No. But in my heart, he was. Okay? In my pants, he was. All right? And I had a big discussion with Evan and with Theo about what to do with Kyle Pitts because our algorithm is starting to really hate Kyle Pitts. The lifetime value machine learning tool that is powering the Dynasty rankings hates Kyle Pitts. And my argument was, we can't allow the machine to tank Pitts until we see Pitts with Penix, the PP stack. I said the PP stack could be it. Or it's the Penix London stack. Or, in fact, it's neither. It's just interception return touchdowns, and they sit on a lead, and no one gets there. Okay. Well, of course, Bijan. If you're up 20, Bijan's going to get there. Duh, Bijan. But other than Bijan, not the game environment you're looking for, unfortunately. But I at least wanted to see signs of life from Kyle Pitts, and we didn't see that. So we had a quarterback change, just like we had a quarterback change in Las Vegas. And what happened? Brock Bowers goes nuclear immediately. Quarterback change in Atlanta. Nothing from Kyle Pitts. So I relented and I apologized to Evan. I said, wherever our systems slot in Kyle Pitts is where we slot in Kyle Pitts. But it also could be a small sample trap because we just talked about they didn't have to throw. They didn't have to make big plays in the passing game. Maybe another week. I could see this happening to me, where with Kyle Pitts, because he's still so young and so many tight ends like David Njoku, they take until age 28 to really break out. You know he has the raw material. He has the 1,000-yard season. He has the athleticism. He has it all. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take years and years and dud after dud after dud after dud to get me off Kyle Pitts in Dynasty. I'm still buying. I acknowledge that he has to drop. In the rankings, he has to drop. But I'm buying. Lions. Not ready to panic yet. Lions said, easy, guys. We got this. Right? So Lions and Rams, they're, whether they get decimated through injury or decimated through free agency or aging off the team or a lack of draft picks, just the natural turnover of a unit, like what's happening in San Francisco. Lions are figuring it out. They're patching it together. Lions patching it together. Rams patching it together. I'm impressed with how some of these NFC teams are just figuring it out on defense and letting the offense win games. So that's what's super cool. Lions not dead yet. Keenan Allen not dead yet. Keenan Allen's a top 10 receiver in the second half. So we talked about this. Like, hey, this guy's had 20-point performances in 3 out of the last 4 games. It's now 4 out of the last 5 games, which is incredibly impressive. He's not that old, right? He's still in his early 30s. He's a couple years younger than Adam Thielen. Why can't Keenan Allen continue to produce for another year or two? Of all the tight ends that perform well in Week 16, Chigakonkwo really got my attention. That's 2 weeks in a row. He's been commanding big targets. He's producing. Talked about him with the tight end whisperer, Andrew Cooper. So I think Chigakonkwo is going to be my tight end sleeper of 2025. Write that down. In terms of QB receiver stacks, it's looking like Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin are your league-winning stacks, and I love to see it. It was my preferred QB wide receiver stack, so that is absolutely victory lap worthy. Brian Thomas, victory lap worthy. Brian Thomas is better than Marvin Harrison Jr. Can we just be done with this debate? Like, enough already? Remember, I was like, but where would you rank Harrison versus Brian Thomas? So isn't Brian Thomas better? Don't we know he's better? Just because the NFL drafted Harrison 10-plus spots earlier? Why do we care about that? We know Neighbors is the truth. And if we know Neighbors is this good, then his teammate must also be good. Because his teammate was facing all that target competition from Malik Neighbors and was still producing at a high level. Marvin Harrison Jr. is overrated. And I called it exactly. On the Starter Stream show, roll the tape. I said Marvin Harrison's going to go 4 for 8 for 40 yards. And his exact stat line was 4 for 8 for 39 yards. I'm not going to have a better call than that. And then in that same game, Brian Thomas goes ham. With Mac Jones again. Now, this is also a Tom Savage corollary situation where the targets are consolidating around Brian Thomas because most of their other receivers have been injured. It's Brian Thomas and Parker Washington. And Mac Jones is going to lock in on that alpha receiver. Does that mean Mac Jones is better than Trevor Lawrence? No. I agree with Andrew Cooper. It's way too soon to say that. Give Trevor Lawrence another year. But it's fun to talk about. It's fun to talk about. Baker Mayfield, 26 fantasy points. We talked about starting him. You got to start him in every league. You're starting Baker Mayfield, period. 26 fantasy points. He's a top 5 weekly option. And Jalen McMillan thriving. Another touchdown for Jalen McMillan. Discount Chris Godwin. That's Jalen McMillan. Better player than Jalen Polk. I think Theo was the first one to say that. Theo was talking about Jalen McMillan all summer. What a hit. Cooper Rush, top 5 backup quarterback in the league. This is rapid fire. Isn't this rapid fire? This is rapid. We're going take by take by take. Bang, 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 bang. Tank Dell. Oh. He finally works his way back. He's had some big weeks in the second half. Another spike week for Tank Dell. It was beautiful. It was all happening. And then heartbreak for him. This is Chris Olave 2.0. This is a strong buy in Dynasty. He's going to be back. This is not the tightrope procedure. You'd be surprised how well these players can recover from these types of gruesome injuries. How it looks on camera is not correlated with the difficulty of rehabilitation. Sometimes an innocuous-looking injury is really tough to rehabilitate. And on the flip side, a gruesome injury heals up just fine. So capitalize on the perception. Oh, Chris Olave might have to retire with concussion syndrome. Oh, Tank Dell, another gruesome injury. He's undersized. He's too small for the league. Bye-bye. James Cook, 27 fantasy points on a 50% rush share. They're giving Ty Johnson, they're giving Ray Davis significant carries out of the backfield. And yet he's scoring 27 fantasy points because he's scoring 2 touchdowns, and it's just what's happening. Kyron Williams, meanwhile, 82% rush share, scores 19 fantasy points. Now, these are the 2 running backs that are undersized that I have doubted over the last year and a half. I've been a skeptic, a James Cook skeptic, a Kyron Williams skeptic, and they have run very pure. Kyron Williams is getting there legitimately. Kyron Williams is forcing a Bayesian reevaluation. Not so much with James Cook. James Cook is getting there with just positive variance. 50% rush share. The team is not as committed to him as the fantasy point totals suggest. Meanwhile, it's the opposite with Kyron Williams. The Rams are super committed to him. So I'm much more likely to draft a Kyron Williams in 2025 than I will be a James Cook, in spite of all the fantasy points he's scoring. I'll be drafting a lot of Drake May, too. I mean, Drake May, another 30 rushing yards. Wow, right? Wow. Number 1 receiver, Kayshon Boutte. And 30 rushing yards. And almost beats the Bills. Good player. Really, really good. So, in 2025, Drake May really feels like this year's Jaden Daniels. Where you drafted him, how you might stack him. I think it's going to be similar best ball ADPs for the top receiver for the Patriots, whoever that's going to be, whether it's T. Higgins or top draft pick, and wherever Terry McLaurin was drafted in 2025 and 2024, I think similar. And I think Drake May will have a similar ADP to Jaden Daniels in 2025. So it is worth noting, right, that we generally faded Patrick Taylor this week, thankfully, especially when compared to, say, a Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford easily. But Patrick Taylor was supposed to be the starting running back for a Shanahan. Was he not? So if he's a Shanahan starting running back, isn't he going for 100 yards and a touchdown automatically? Or does it actually matter that Isaac Garendo is a big, fast running back who's actually skilled, and Patrick Taylor's a journeyman? Is it not just the coach? Is it actually the running back's talent matters? Seems so. Just like those Colts receivers. Michael Pittman, 3 fantasy points. Josh Downs, 15 fantasy points. I love that distinction. I love that dichotomy right there. That's it. That is it. This makes me very happy. You have to understand, Michael Pittman is an Adonis. I was at the Senior Bowl, saw Michael Pittman. I was in awe. Okay? I was in awe. Brandon Ayuk was there, and not an impressive physique. Okay? Stature. Right? Even Chase Claypool was there. And Chase Claypool, yes, he was huge and jacked, but he looked more like a tight end. There was something about the way Michael Pittman glided around and was 6'3", 215, great-looking guy, smooth on the field. There was just aesthetically, he was beautiful. Okay? Josh Downs is undersized and unathletic. Josh Downs is just outworking everybody. Josh Downs is just finding a way to get open. He's finding a way to squeeze the football. He's finding a way to show toughness at the catch point. Incredible strength and just tenacity. And it's why football is great. It's why football is great that if you put Josh Downs next to Michael Pittman and you said, who's the better NFL receiver, who's more productive? And even if you showed some stats from college, showed their workouts, had some data in front of you, and then you got to see them, you'd be like, there's no comparison. There's no way. It's not believable that this little guy would just be a better NFL receiver than that guy. And yet that's what's happening. And that's what makes this sport so fucking cool. From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.